you go.
Hi everyone, I'm Father Zach MABEE. I'm sitting in for Father Joe and the usual crew today, and this is the Guest Who session. It's good to be with all of you. I'll actually be here today and also tomorrow. We were going to try to do a live session tomorrow from Sacred Heart Major Seminary. Due to COVID protocols and the like, we are going to stall that. We'll hopefully do it in the not too distant future. We'll do a session live from there, but I thought we would just talk about the seminary a bit and the discernment and vocations process somewhat. So we'll kind of do that tomorrow. So I'd be happy to field questions regarding that tomorrow and talk a little bit about my own experience of that journey. I decided today that I would just tell you a little bit about myself and my own journey of faith, my own walk to the priesthood, and I'm happy to field questions about myself, my own experience, about anything that strikes you as I'm talking. And I think what I'm going to do is just share my own story a bit here, and I'll probably pause at a few junctures amidst that. So again, if you think of questions pertinent to what I'm sharing about myself, fire those away. If you have other questions, philosophical, theological, and otherwise, I'm happy to field those as well. So I'm moving in. I'm kind of at an in-between state right now. I'm actually moving in at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in the next few weeks. I'll just be in residence there this upcoming year, trying to finish up some of my doctoral studies, and then starting next year, we'll be teaching there and helping out as a member of the faculty. So anyway, just a bit about me. So I'm a priest of the Diocese of Lansing. I just hit 5 years ordained this summer. So I was ordained on June 20th, 2015. And just celebrated my 5-year anniversary as a priest. I was ordained with Father David Fons and Father Bob Basic, if you know either one of them. So they were my two other classmates that year. I've had a bit of a journey. I spent 7 years in the seminary. I entered back in 2008, and I'll walk you through that story a little bit more in detail. And did my first 2 years as a priest in Flint. So I was in Flint at our Catholic Community of Flint cluster of parishes from 2015 to 17. I did a couple summer stints as the chaplain at Camp Sancta Maria up north in Gaylord, 2017 and 2018. And then I've spent the last few years overseas finishing up some philosophy and theology studies for the sake of this upcoming post. But again, it's a pleasure to be with you all and to share my story. And again, feel free to fire questions about any number of things as I go, and I'll try to pause a few times here to tend to some of those. So an interesting aspect about my story, and there are a few significant ones that'll emerge along the way here. An interesting aspect of my story is that I was not brought up Catholic. And it turns out I have one brother, and he also just was ordained a priest. He was ordained a priest this summer for the Archdiocese of Detroit. And so we both ended up converting to the faith along the way. So that's a pretty striking thing about us and our family, and I'll get into that more as we go. But I was not brought up Catholic. I was brought up Lutheran, in fact, evangelical Lutheran, if you know kind of the different stripes of Lutheranism. Went to Christian schools growing up. So I'm originally from Toledo, Ohio. Shortly after I was born, we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and we spent most of my childhood there. So my brother Drew, who's 3 years younger than I am, he was born there. We attended Christian schools. I went to kind of my K through 8 years at a school connected with a Presbyterian church in Atlanta, and then was slated to go to a Catholic high school down there, but just before I was about to start, my dad got a job transfer back up to Ohio, so we moved back there, and my parents always had a fondness for Catholic education, though we were Lutheran. So they ended up having me enroll at St. John's Jesuit High School in Toledo, Ohio. And I'm happy to hear if there are any people with St. John's connections or affiliations watching. So it's an all-boys Jesuit school. Some of you in the greater Detroit area would be familiar with U of D Jesuit. It's kind of the counterpart in this area to St. John's. But I did my 4 years there. I was there from 98 to 2002. Had a great experience there. Was involved in a number of things, played basketball, did a good bit of stuff with kind of the campus ministry program and the Christian service program, doing works of mercy with the poor and things like that. Didn't have a strong sense of what I wanted to do eventually along the way. It was funny in my own case. I had a few passing senses when I was younger about wanting to get into ministry. So I recall one time when I was maybe 10 or 12 years old, something like that, I told my mother that I thought I wanted to be a minister, a Protestant minister at that juncture. And I remember having kind of that sense along the way. And, nothing sort of much came of that at that point. And then when I was at St. John's, I recall, I think it was my junior year there, I told my mom at some point that I thought I wanted to be a Jesuit. And, I was not Catholic at the time, and I think that's probably the kind of comment that would jar a lot of parents nowadays. So she was trying to wonder what was going on there. But there was something about, there were several of the older Jesuits, and I do want to mention them by name. Father Pat Hussey, God rest his soul, he died about maybe 5 to 7 years ago. And Father Frank Canfield, who is still with us, but who is not in the best of health. He lives at the Columbiere Center in Clarkston, Michigan, which is a kind of Jesuit retreat center and conference center, and also retirement facility there. So I remember those two in particular had a very big and positive impact on me as kind of mentor figures. And I think as I got to know them along the way, there was something about just kind of their life and their vocation that fascinated me and that kind of drew me in a sense. So anyway, I had a great 4 years at St. John's, and then decided to go to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for my undergraduate studies. And so I enrolled there in 2002. I wasn't all that sure what I wanted to do. I liked to write, I knew that, and I was kind of interested in politics and economics, literature, things like that, more kind of humanities and social sciences. I mean, I had a very strong sense that I was not going to be a doctor or an engineer. I had a pretty strong sense that I wasn't going to end up in kind of the business school or something like that, but I wasn't. I thought maybe a journalist, a writer, something like. So I went in with a kind of vague sense. And I also entered U of M with a kind of vague sense that I wanted to practice my faith in an ongoing way. But it was a little bit unclear to me what I wanted to do with that at that juncture, because again, I had been brought up Lutheran. We had kind of stopped practicing regularly as Lutherans around when I started high school at St. John's. So I had been kind of in this Catholic setting during my high school years, and I had been away from kind of the Lutheran world more or less for a bit there. And so I wasn't sure how I wanted that to look, or what direction I wanted to take with that. I got involved in a number of things in college. I wrote and was an editor for a bit for the Michigan Daily, the student paper. and got involved with a handful of other clubs and organizations. I eventually got connected with a student group on campus called University Christian Outreach, which had a tremendous impact on my life. And I think I was partly drawn to it because it had an ecumenical aim to it. So that is, it wasn't just Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, but it was kind of a space for Christians of all varieties. So I think that was partly what drew me into it. So I got connected with them and fairly active. And again, there was this question of maybe finding a church to call home on the weekends. And I was still a little bit unsure about that and, where I wanted to go with that. Around the same time, so we're kind of into like my sophomore year now, I decided I wanted to study philosophy. So I took a freshman seminar in philosophy at U of M that I just really loved and found really captivating. The topic of it was in fact love, morality, and friendship. And I remember that class just really stuck with me. I think in a way it was like the class I really cared about far and away above all the others. And enjoyed the reading, enjoyed the writing, and just found I thought I had a kind of knack for philosophy. So I stuck with that, and I ended up doing philosophy and linguistics as my majors. But I think that involvement and connection with philosophy got me thinking a lot about kind of the history of philosophical thought and the history of theology. And, once you start doing that in much detail, you can often find yourself very easily getting into things Catholic, just the kind of great philosophical and theological tradition of the church, the way that the church kind of took up the thought of Aristotle into its kind of body of teaching, and the long line that you trace through St. Thomas Aquinas and the scholastics, and that whole sort of tradition of thought kind of drew me in a special way, and I found it all very kind of captivating and compelling. And it happened as well that in this group, University Christian Outreach, or UCO, that I got connected with, I made a lot of friends who were devoted Catholics, and I think they had a very big impact on me as well. And it turns out also that at one of the parishes, the parish right by my house off campus at the time, there were two good priests there working and ministering at the time. One of them, who many of the viewers might well know, is Father Chaz Canoy, who's the pastor in Jackson at St. John the Evangelist now. So I got to know these two priests. Father Jeff Noose was the other priest there. I got to know them quite well, and again, they had an impact on me, much in a kind of similar way as the Jesuits that I had already mentioned. And to be honest, I mean, I had around this time I had grown to kind of care about my faith more, and I had this kind of intellectual draw through my studies to various aspects of the church and its tradition and its doctrine and so on. And I think especially as I spent some time around these two priests, I got to know Father Chaz and Father Jeff in particular, and just saw what their lives were like. I think I just had this very kind of clear and strong sense that like I could see myself doing this, just kind of one of those moments of insight, where you just have that sense that this could work for me. I could see this fitting and making sense for me and my life. And so the idea of the priesthood, if you will, kind of struck me and drew me in. And then I just started thinking about it more and praying about it more. And there was just really this growing and mounting sense that like, this was something that God had in store for me. And so I ended up kind of going with that, and the rest in a sense is history. There's a little bit more I can fill in after that. Let me just see, are there any questions that we should look to now? I thought it might be good to now let's see.
Somebody wants to know what your favorite karaoke song is.
My favorite karaoke song. Yes, so one of the things that we did, so my first 2 years in Flint, so Father Paul Donnelly, who was one of my housemates in Flint, he and I, along with our good friend Val Sunday, who is the admissions director at Powers Catholic High School, the three of us kind of hatched this idea of doing these quarterly, basically, karaoke parties, because we all love singing karaoke, and Father Paul especially is just a tremendous singer. He's really an amazing singer. I'm sure some of you viewing have seen him sing. But so we just kind of hatched this idea of doing like a quarterly karaoke party at some interesting, spot in Flint. We did Tenacity Brewing Company, we did Luigi's Pizzeria, we did and several other spots. But we would have these parties and just sort of invite people through social media, people from the churches and the schools and all the rest of it. So it just became this very kind of nice, festive way to gather people. I think my favorite karaoke song is Against All Odds by Phil Collins. That's probably my favorite number to do. Though I have many, that one probably takes the cake. Now I'm trying to load these questions. I'm not seeing them loading on this top questions bit. Right. Okay. I will keep an eye on this. Yeah. My favorite part of being a priest. I mean, in a certain way, they're kind of the obvious bits, if you will. I mean, I do love celebrating Mass and hearing confessions, probably, above all else. I really do love both of those. I mean, maybe in a kind of less obvious way, or the things that maybe you might not hear from most guys, or the kind of expected answer in a sense. I think for me, a really awesome aspect of being a priest has been just getting to meet so many people and their families, and the ways that, in kind of surprising ways, you end up kind of becoming friends with people, or in a certain way, you end up kind of becoming part of their family somewhat, and you just kind of get to share in their journey in these very kind of interesting and surprising ways that, if I weren't a priest, I almost surely would never get to experience. I mean, I think for me, and I can be a little bit of a social butterfly in my own right. I think for me, that especially has been just really beautiful, and something I've really come to cherish very deeply about the ministry. Okay, good. I see some coming in here now.
This one has popped up before and we haven't touched it. What does the church say we should do with frozen embryos?
That's an interesting question. What does the church say that we should do with frozen embryos? Well, I mean, the sort of the main thing that the church would say with regard to that is that, in a sense, we shouldn't be freezing embryos. I mean, so the kind of larger context of this point, as far as the church is concerned, is kind of maintaining the kind of integral connection, if you will, between marriage and human sexuality and procreation. And I think that the big cautionary point that the church would give nowadays is that through some of these kind of technological developments, which probably a lot of times have a certain kind of good intention behind them. You take something like in vitro fertilization where people use this as a means, say, of conceiving who are having trouble conceiving. Though there's a kind of good intention behind these things, I think the church's kind of steady cautionary point is that you're going to run into problems when you kind of take the generation of new life out of that context of a marriage and the sexual act, and that's really the context that the church has always affirmed as being kind of the proper one for procreation, and really having that come about through the conjugal union of a husband and a wife, rather than, say, in a laboratory. What should we do with embryos that are already frozen? The church would say, certainly that we shouldn't destroy those embryos, and we shouldn't destroy those embryos because those are incipient human beings. Those are human beings in their very earliest developmental stages. So because of that, we should respect them as such, and I don't want to say too much about what sort of the options are given the technology that we have with regard to how we should handle them or what we should do with them. But again, the church's insistence would be that, that's not something we should be up to in the first place, because in a certain sense you're kind of, playing God, as it were, with the science that we have, and you're creating human life in a lab that in many cases is going to be destroyed, sadly. And so that's where I think the church's steady insistence is that, we should let the creation of new life happen within the context of a marriage and within the context of the conjugal act between a husband and a wife. And if we try to kind of separate that out from that setting, we're going to end up with, perhaps unforeseen, perhaps foreseen consequences that are going to be a lot more grave than we would have expected, like having on our hands a bunch of embryos that are frozen and that we don't know what to do with, and that probably will end up being destroyed.
What age did you become Catholic?
So I became Catholic. I went through the RCIA program at St. Thomas the Apostle in Ann Arbor. My senior year of college, so that was 2005 to 2006. So I entered the church at the Easter Vigil in 2006. And my brother, funny enough, he studied at Eastern Michigan University, Father Drew maybe. So he's, it's a bit of a long story, but he's actually a priest of the Archdiocese of Detroit. He was just ordained this summer, as I think I mentioned. He studied at Eastern Michigan University, got connected with Our Lady of Good Counsel Parish in Plymouth, and he entered the church there, kind of under the tutelage of Father John Riccardo, who I'm sure many of you know. And so he ended up going to the seminary through the Detroit Archdiocese. And so he's 3 years younger than I am. And he basically went through a kind of similar process of conversion while he was at university as well. And
I want to know, did your parents become Catholic?
My mother, Cheryl, did become Catholic. She had kind of had some interest in participating in her faith a little bit more around that time when I went through RCIA. So she actually decided to go through it with me. I told her I was doing it, and I said, hey, if you'd like to try this with me, you'd be more than welcome. So she entered the church and was confirmed with me that year in 2006. My dad, my father Bruce, has not, but he shows some pretty strong affinities to the church, and so we shall see.
So when did you enter seminary? The next year?
So I entered the church in 2006 because I was a convert. the kind of standard protocol is that you take 2 years before entering the seminary or a religious community. So I worked in Ann Arbor. I wasn't sure what I was going to do because I was basically planning on entering the seminary, and I kind of needed something to do for a couple years in that interim period. And I didn't really want to kind of move away or start a kind of new job or career knowing that I was going to be doing this. So funny enough, I actually got a position with the Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist, the Dominican community in Ann Arbor. They run a couple K-8 schools there, and so they needed a gym teacher, an athletic director, and coach at their one school. So I went and worked for them for a couple years. I had a wonderful time. It was very good for my kind of discernment while I was doing that. I got to go to daily mass there every day and really kind of keep my focus on the fact that I wanted to become a priest. So, so I did that those 2 years, and then it was in the fall of 2008 that I entered seminary. And so I had my bachelor's degree in philosophy. I did 1 year at Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, where I'll be moving soon. And then I did 2 years at Catholic University of America at their seminary, their theological college. I did a little bit of extra philosophy study there to pick up my master's along the way. And then I was able to do my theology studies over in Rome at the North American College, and I had a wonderful experience with all those different phases, and it was 7 years altogether that I did in the seminary, and so then I was ordained in 2015.
How were you in Lansing and your brother in Detroit?
Well, given that we both entered the church, so I was in Ann Arbor when I did that, living in Ann Arbor, so I did it in the Lansing Diocese. And my brother was at Eastern Michigan, which is a little bit closer to the border with the Detroit Archdiocese. And I think just through some practical circumstances, he ended up going through the RCIA program in Plymouth at Our Lady of Good Counsel. And then he got to know Father John there. And Father John actually offered him to kind of live at the rectory for a year and experience that whole dimension. And that, I think, was kind of a big part of what hooked him. So,
yeah. How did you? Okay, your next one. What's your favorite religious song?
My favorite religious song. Let's see. It might well be the traditional hymn, Holy, Holy, Holy. Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, early in the morning, or some short. That Holy, Holy, Holy. I think that might be my favorite religious song.
No, did you just celebrate the Latin Mass?
I do sometimes celebrate the Latin Mass. So I had. When I was in seminary, I took a course on celebrating the Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass, and I wouldn't say when I did that I had a kind of particular devotion to it myself, but I did have the sense that there was some pastoral need for it here in the Lansing Diocese, so I did take the course, and then sure enough had the opportunity to celebrate it once right after I was ordained, and then more opportunities came before long, so I've kind of gotten in the practice of offering it occasionally here, and I've enjoyed that very much, and have been enriched by that experience.
They asked, where were you trained for that?
So I did a course at the seminary. We had a priest. Monsignor Sozman is a priest of one of the Illinois dioceses who was working in Rome at the time, and he offered just a kind of simple course to those of us who I think we were deacons at the time on celebrating the traditional Mass. So I took that course, and then I felt sort of comfortable enough, if you will, when I came back, but I was still a little bit uneasy about kind of the ins and the outs of it, and so I celebrated my first one with the help of a master of ceremonies, kind of making sure I was doing everything well, and have had the help of some since then. And I've kind of just, I've been kind of doing it when I've been asked and when needed. And have enjoyed it very much.
Your favorite philosophers, both inside and outside the church?
Yeah, favorite philosophers. I would definitely put, kind of the broadly speaking Aristotelian tradition up there, so kind of Aristotle and various interpreters of him, like Thomas Aquinas, maybe chief among them. More contemporary, some kind of thinkers in the kind of Anglo-American or analytic world that maybe kind of drew on them, like Elizabeth Anscombe, who was a Catholic philosopher in the 20th century. Some of her writings had a profound impact on me. There would be a lot of others. I mean, I've kind of done more of my stuff in kind of contemporary philosophy. So there's a number of people who've kind of affected my thinking there. People like Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein and his interpreters, and Paul Feyerabend, and some different folks like that. Some of the phenomenological thinkers, Husserl, and people who followed upon him too, like even Dietrich von Hildebrand and Saint Edith Stein, who was a student of his. And so I wouldn't say I would pin myself down too tightly to one sort of thinker or line of thought, but that kind of, I would say generally I kind of align with that kind of great tradition that kind of drew upon Aristotle in a particular way and was received into the church by Aquinas and others, and various kind of offshoots of that. So.
What are the biggest differences between Lutheran and Catholic beliefs?
I suppose among the kind of mainline Protestant traditions, so those would be like Lutheran, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Methodist, and so on. A lot of people would think the Lutheran tradition is kind of one of, if not the kind of closest to the Catholic, to the Catholic Church and her belief and her practice. I would say largely there are some kind of maybe key basic points in theology and worship where there's a difference. If you kind of know some of the history of the controversies surrounding like the Reformation and the Council of Trent, there were some key disputes about like the issue of like justification, like how a believer comes to be justified before God by faith, and Luther and some other early Protestant thinkers tended to push this idea very much that you're justified by faith alone. And the kind of Catholic response, that was given like at the Council of Trent was that in a certain way you're justified by faith, which is God's free gift to us, but also in a certain way by works that are done from faith and out of charity. So that was a kind of particular point of contrast. The Lutheran tradition has tended to kind of not, in the Catholic Church there's a very strong sense and belief, like what you would have in the Orthodox churches as well of the East, that the Eucharistic species, the consecrated host and wine, are truly the body and blood of Christ. And the Lutheran tradition would tend to kind of de-emphasize those things, or maybe say that somehow the bread and wine are still there, but they're kind of co-present with the body and blood of Christ. And their tradition generally would tend to be a little bit less kind of high church liturgical, if you will. And so there are other points of difference. They would tend not to emphasize things like Marian piety the way that the Catholic Church does, though Luther himself seems to have had a very kind of deep Marian piety in his own life. And you could kind of go on from there. I did note it seems like maybe the questions are not being heard great, so I'll try to repeat them when they're said here.
Okay. Do you speak Latin?
I know Latin well enough to get by, and to celebrate the Mass in Latin fine, and I can read it, decently. I wouldn't say I'm a great Latinist by any stretch, but I can. It's my Latin, like many of my other foreign language skills, I would say is serviceable.
Okay. So just to clarify, you didn't become a Jesuit. You're a diocesan.
Yes. So it's asked. Yeah. Did I become a Jesuit or just no? So I am a diocesan priest. I'm a priest of the Diocese of Lansing. I did think for a bit about maybe joining the Jesuits or the Dominicans or a religious order. But I think in the end, I was drawn just to the idea particularly of kind of working and ministering with kind of more ordinary folks and their families like that you would get in a parish setting. So I think that was really the kind of dimension that drew me most strongly to the priesthood.
So when you were discerning, they want to know, did you date?
Did I date when I was discerning? So the way that the kind of program works now, and this is a kind of interesting point to touch on the seminary process too, which I could talk about more tomorrow. So I think a lot of people think that this notion of discernment is something that you kind of have to work out, if you will, in advance. So, like, in other words, you kind of discern whether you should be a priest, and then you go to the seminary. But actually, the kind of more traditional way of looking at it, and I think in a way the more helpful way, is to say that, well, no, that if you think you have a certain kind of inkling or aspiration to be a priest, and you don't have any kind of major obstacles to that, and there's a desire on your part, and the church seems receptive to you, then it's probably a good idea just to go ahead and give it a try. And then the discernment, if you will, can kind of happen while you're in the seminary system, or while you're in like a religious novitiate or something like that. In my own case, I had a serious girlfriend my senior year of high school. There was a kind of, relationship that I had kind of on and off through the course of college, through my undergraduate years. But it was kind of that junior or senior year of college that I started thinking seriously about some of these discernment questions. And I think once I kind of started thinking more seriously about them, I kind of decided to kind of not to date at that juncture, just because I wanted to be kind of honest and genuine about what I was looking into and what I was pursuing.
How did you get to study in Rome? Were you selected? Or was it your...
Yeah, so how did I end up studying in Rome? That's something where, some guys will do their studies here stateside, and like I said, I did part of mine here, and sometimes there's an opportunity, depending on your diocese and this, that, and the other thing, to go and study like theology in Rome. And I was given the opportunity by the bishop and the vocations director, and I was happy to do that and to give that a try, and I really did enjoy my time there. I think they probably would often send somebody who they think can handle the language barrier, decently, and I've always done well with languages, so kind of studying in Italian wasn't much of a barrier or an obstacle for me. That went pretty smoothly, and yeah, I had a very good time. I mean, I enjoyed the formation process, I enjoyed the studies, and I made some really good and lasting friendships while I was there.
So in your travels, besides Michigan and Rome, where's your favorite place?
Where is my favorite place in my travels besides Michigan and Rome? That's probably that's a tricky question. I have had the opportunity to go to a lot of very beautiful and special places that I've enjoyed in a lot of different ways. I have had a particular fondness for Austria and Switzerland. among countries I've visited. So I would put them right up near the top of the list.
Nice. I don't understand this one. How is the heart opening in these COVID times?
Okay, so there's a question about how is the heart opening in COVID times. Presumably that's Sacred Heart, the seminary. My understanding, and I don't want to say anything too officially here and misspeak, but I think what's happening is that the seminarians are basically going to come back as they normally would, and they would be in residence there at the seminary, taking classes and doing formation and so on. But I gather that the commuter students are going to be kind of doing their, because Sacred Heart does have a good number of commuter students or lay people who are working on degrees and so on. I gather that they are going to be kind of doing their studies largely remotely.
Here's a big one. Do you think Lutherans and Roman Catholics will ever share the Eucharist together?
Do I think Lutherans and Roman Catholics will ever share the Eucharist? Well, that's a tricky question. I would hope in a way that they would. And I know this kind of thing is being talked about steadily, constantly, in official settings in Rome and in other places. It is a kind of scandal that there are so many Christians who don't share the Eucharist together. And, I think it's a very good and kind of pious Christian prayer to pray for and to ask the Lord for and to beseech him for greater unity among God's people. And whether that'll happen or how that will happen, I don't claim to have a handle on that. But I certainly do hope that someday, Lutherans and Catholics. There's even in recent history in the Catholic Church been this, inception of this Anglican ordinariate that you might be familiar with, which is a kind of crossover body, if you will, between the Anglican world and the Catholic Church. So that's kind of enabled people who are from an Anglican tradition to participate in the Eucharist in a fuller way in the Catholic Church. So there could develop something similar to that eventually, and I'm not sure, and I haven't sort of been privy to any of these discussions in a kind of higher level way, but I certainly do hope and pray for that, eventually.
Can you talk about your graduate studies?
Yes, so I as part of my theology studies in Rome, I did there's a kind of ecclesiastical track of degrees. So they have what they call a bachelor's, a license, or a licentiate, and then a doctorate in sacred theology. And so I did my bachelor's or baccalaureate in sacred theology as a seminarian, and then began my license or licentiate. And they call it that because once you have it, you're licensed, if you will, to teach at a seminary or Catholic college. So I finished that in Rome in fundamental theology, a particular branch of theology, and then the bishop invited me to finish a philosophy doctorate for the sake of the teaching that I'll eventually be doing at the seminary, and it's a bit of a long story how that all worked out, but I ended up in the UK for that. So I was there the last 2 years in Reading, just outside of London, and working on that, living at a parish and helping out as I was doing that, but working on this philosophy doctorate for the sake of working and teaching at the seminary.
How was that?
How was that? That was a very good experience. I've enjoyed the studies very much. I'm going to kind of spend this next year continuing to work on my writing remotely, which is what kind of everybody's going to be doing, at this juncture. But it was very good. I got to stay at a parish, Christ the King parish. If anyone is viewing from Christ the King, kind of on the south side of Reading. It was a very lovely parish to serve at and minister in, and I was able to kind of help there as a priest in residence and a kind of weekend assistant of sorts. And yeah, it was very good. It was very edifying. It was very kind of enlightening and illuminating to kind of spend some time in the church in England and almost have a little kind of missionary stint there, if you will. But people were extremely warm and welcoming there, and I do, as I said, give my warmest regards to anyone from there if you happen to be tuned in right now.
So, were your parents surprised? What was it like telling them?
Yeah, so the current question is, were my parents surprised when I decided to enter the seminary and become a priest? I don't think they were probably terribly surprised that I took on a more serious religious calling. It was funny. They took me to do one of these kind of more serious aptitude tests as I was finishing high school, and I think that the top career path that came up for me was something like religious leadership. So I think in as much as that happened, it wasn't a terrible surprise. I mean, I think they were a little bit jarred by it, and I think probably as a lot of parents have been, they sort of wonder, if I'll really be happy doing this, and the fact that you can't marry and have a family, and they probably wondered about sort of how it would be in a number of respects, and they did voice that to me. But I must say, once I made the decision to go ahead with it, they really were very, very supportive, and they've continued to be tremendously supportive. And I think there are aspects of it, obviously, that they don't quite get in a sense, but despite that, they've been a huge support to me and my brother, and yeah, they've made that dimension of it very, very easy and very graceful.
So Kaylee Finn wants to know who your favorite Finn is.
I've got an inside question from a family that are dear friends of mine, the Finn family. So who is my favorite member of that family? I think I'm going to take the fifth on this one. We'll talk about that more in person when I see all of them next.
Right. So they want to clarify. So you plan to teach in the seminary? Yes.
So I'm going to be at the seminary. Why will I be there? Is the question. I'll be there mainly to teach. It looks like largely it will be philosophy, maybe some theology, and I'll probably do some degree of formation work with the seminarians who are there. I also almost certainly will take over coaching the basketball team, which I'll be happy to do when that time comes. But yeah, I'll kind of just be there to the extent that they need me, and be available for whatever happens to come. So.
Are the class sizes rising?
So I think at the moment, my guess, and again, this is a pretty rough guess, I think there would probably be something like 120 seminarians there at the moment, and I think probably the biggest contingent would be from Detroit in the Archdiocese. We have quite a few guys from Lansing there, maybe 20 or so, and then you have a smattering of guys from different parts of Michigan, some from Minnesota, the Dakotas. So, but Sacred Heart has developed a very good reputation among American seminaries. So no, I'm looking forward very much to being there and serving there.
Do you serve here once a month?
Yeah. So it's also just been mentioned. So I was asked to start helping out a little bit on the weekends here at Holy Family in Grand Blanc. So I've been coming here for the last little bit, one weekend a month to help, and that's been a pleasure too, to work with Father Joe, and also just to see there are a number of people and families that I got to know during my time in Flint, and yeah, it's a pleasure to be back around here as well.
Do you hope to be back in a church someday?
Yeah, I really do love. I mean, when I take on this role of working at the seminary, I'll kind of be there during the week. Once it gets into full swing, and then eventually we'll probably get a weekend assignment, to help at a parish in the diocese, and I'm not quite sure where that will be yet. I do love working in parish settings. I have enjoyed that very much. I like, again, just sort of being with ordinary people and their families and doing the kinds of things that a parish priest gets to do. I mean, being at the seminary, I'll probably be spared some of the administrative tasks and so on that a lot of priests have to face, and I can't say I'll miss those tremendously, but sort of the ordinary interactions with parishioners I surely will. But I will get to do that somewhat. I do love to teach. I think I do it fairly well, and I love philosophy especially. I've always, as I shared my story, I've always had a kind of passion for it, so the fact that I'll get to teach philosophy is a big upside to me, but no, I'm looking forward to this next phase. I think it really will be a good fit, and I'm happy to be doing it.
How the clarification of how you determine what diocese you go to?
Yeah, so the question of what diocese do you go to and how that's determined. I mean, usually it's the diocese that you are from. In our case, like I said, we moved several times when I was younger, so that was maybe a little bit more up in the air.
And not being Catholic.
And yeah, so I wasn't brought in Catholic, so for me it was the fact that I was in Ann Arbor and I came into the church here, so that's sort of my home parish, St. Thomas there in Ann Arbor. And again, as I shared in my brother's case, a similar thing happened for him, but within the archdiocese, so that kind of is how those lines were drawn. But it does happen in different ways. Sometimes a guy might join a diocese based on where he had been working or where he had been settled for a bit. So there is a bit of fluidity to it, though I think typically, dioceses will want you to have some sort of significant connection to them, so that you're not just sort of, picking from the grab bag, as it were. But yeah, in my case, I'm basically here in my home diocese.
Do you have any other siblings?
No. So do I have any other siblings? No. So it's just me and my younger brother, Father Drew. So we were 2 for 2 when it came to clergy. So he is at St. John Fisher Parish, which is effectively the student center or student parish at Oakland University. So he's just been there for the last few weeks now.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
And does Sacred Heart have any other sports teams?
Does Sacred Heart have any other sports teams? I think I saw a mention in the comments of a track team, for instance. So basically what Sacred Heart has is the big thing there, and this is the long line that I'll kind of be in. So they have a tradition of a basketball program. So Father Paul Berg, God rest his soul, who was there for something like 55 years. He taught philosophy actually and coached basketball. But he built up this kind of tradition of Sacred Hearts having a basketball team. And it's an interesting setup because it's a team composed of just seminarians, and then we would play these kind of different other teams that we could find. So like we would sometimes play just kind of groups of guys that maybe one of the seminarians had a connection with from high school or something, or the guards at the seminary put together a team of their family and friends. And one of the priests who used to be there, his brother was an FBI agent, so we played a group of FBI guys. And so we would kind of piece together a schedule like that. But there also have developed these seminary tournaments. So like Mundelein Seminary in Chicago has a tournament each year, and the Josephinum in Columbus has a tournament each year. So we kind of go to these, and I will say that the year that I was at Sacred Heart, Father Berg died mid-season and mid-semester. So I was in his final semester of ancient and medieval philosophy, and also his final basketball team. And under the leadership of Father Mike McDermott, SJ, we pulled things together and went and won the Josephinum tournament that year. But I think that the proud basketball tradition has continued at Sacred Heart. I think they do a little bit of soccer as well, but basketball is really, as far as I know, the main thing. They do have a kind of theater and drama department, if you will, that puts on a play each year, so that's noteworthy as well. But
Kevin wants to know what's with the socks.
okay, Kevin has asked about my socks. I'm wearing red, white, and blue striped socks. Maybe these are kind of like my Waldo socks.
But I noticed when I met you the first time too, you had bright stripes.
Kevin noticed I had interesting socks on the first time. Well, one of the things I've told a lot of people recently is, when you wear black most of the time, it's interesting to kind of keep things lively somehow.
I like it.
And so my approach has been through my socks.
I like it.
Right. Now we know what to get them as a gift.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Father Joe's team won some tournament while he was there, or
Right.
championship.
So he says.
Well, that's what they mean.
Right. Yeah, so Father Joe apparently was on some sort of winning team or championship team at Sacred Heart. That wouldn't surprise me. Like I said, especially as far as basketball goes, I think Sacred Heart has a quite strong reputation among the seminaries. And hopefully we can, keep that going these next few years. So.
And that's it.
And that's it. Well, again, it's been a pleasure to be with all of you today. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about me a little bit and my own story.
Share. Ask them to share.
The link you mean?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I am being encouraged. If you guys could please, if you've enjoyed it, if you watch, please share the link. Please tell your friends about the show and invite them to join in. So I will be here tomorrow again from noon to 1 o'clock again. And what I'll try to do tomorrow is talk, again, we were going to try to go to the seminary because of COVID restrictions. We will not be there. But what I'm...
Go sometime.
Eventually we will go, yeah, as I was saying.
You'll join us?
Yeah, eventually what we'll do is once I've moved in, I'll try to join you guys on site at Sacred Heart, hopefully with Father
Yep.
Joe.
Yep.
And we can kind of do that all together on site there. But tomorrow I'll try to talk a little bit more about the discernment process and about vocations and about some things related to that. So if you have questions about how seminary works more specifically, or how a young man, be it yourself or a son or a grandson or whatever, might inquire into the priesthood, or maybe a daughter or someone about religious life, I can kind of talk about those things more tomorrow. But again, it's been a pleasure being with you all today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.